I'm always amazed at how in the videos the boards all lay so flat and just drive right in, just hammering the spikes in. This one was bowing out a lot, this long board, probably because it went past this bow in the yard and then it stuck out too far at this end. So I had to actually screw it 2x4 down, put 4 screws across, take a couple sample pieces there, pried it in, used the shims, got it in tight so I can hand nail it. I do have like a stretcher clamp bar to go, but 2 rows is too close. It's got a little crank on it that can draw them in too. So there's lots of ways to do this. In the past I've even used a 2x4 off the opposite wall and just laid it down and ran long boards coming out from it on the opposite wall and just keep cutting them shorter as I go when I have to cinch in one of the boards that's kind of bowed out or too big a gap. So I got in close enough to nail it. I'm still hand nailing here. I was able to use a nailer right with the door by opening the door and putting out the door, but it was just for a short stretch. Looks like at least I'm going to need at least one more row hand nailed before I can get the nailer in here. So anyway, that's just one way to do it. There's lots of ways to wedge the boards in. I have another little square that's just a square plate with 3 holes that I screw straight into the floor and could run it off that, but I figured I might need this for the future. So one question should be, how many rows from the wall do I need to face nail or nail down by hand before the boss stitch nailer will be able to fit? Mine was 2 rows. This is 2 1/4 inch wide oak planks. They're 3/4 inch thick. I think it's 2 1/4 gun stock is the name. So it was 2 rows. The 3rd row I was able to start using the nailer. Again, your wood's going to expand this way. It's not going to expand much that way, long ways. I'm in the summer, so if anything, it's going to contract. Probably it's best to put it in the winter when the wood's already kind of contracted. And then it'll expand to fill the gaps later in the summer. But so I'm in the summer, so I'm figuring I can leave a little bit more clearance. But you see, I just have a little bit between the wall. Now, when you get to a board like this, it's got a little gap in here. If you can see it on this side, and it's kind of tight on that side. Don't worry, the nailer's going to suck that in. If you start from left to right and start going over, put nails, put them a little closer together, it'll typically suck that in. You don't have to wedge in every piece. A lot of them even wider than this gap will often suck in. I had the little bow in the wall there, and it followed out about 10 rows before I really was able to put real straight boards in there. Now this is a high traffic flow area through the door, so I'm using less joints, longer boards in this area. And now I'm getting up to this doorway, and I undercut the casing, but I have thresholds and things. I'll see if I'm going to butt it right up against the tile probably and use thresholds elsewhere. Maybe right over here I'm going to have a T threshold. Got a bunch of different profiles that I can show you later. Okay, there's a spot I have to notch out to slide up under my casing where I'm still hitting baseboard when the screw comes on. So I just marked it with some tape, and I'll use a jigsaw and just cut out that little corner to make it around the baseboard and get up under the casing, because my quarter round won't go over the casing, so it'll just go up to here and stop. So there's that little edge I need to notch out so I can slide it up under there. But I have some clamps, and I clamp it on my miter saw stand. Okay, a couple of things to go over. This is a threshold here. I built up a little board underneath it for this T-piece. Cut a little sample off the end of my T-piece threshold. There's lots of different profiles. I'm going to set it in there like that. The piece I cut is just perfect for this resting, so when I drive nails through there, it'll go through the board and there won't be an air gap underneath it. So I'm buttoning the boards up along there. I run this T-threshold across, connect. Now also, another way you could do that is to cut the tenon here off, the tongue there, the tenon, shave it off and then route a gap in there for these boards to slide into. I am having to cut off the tongues off these boards. I did that actually, but then I thought it's not going to come in at exactly 90 degrees, so I'm just going to put a T-threshold in there, nail it down. Now the other thing is on these boards, I really only had to wedge about 3 times across this entire floor, and I'm almost done in here. But see this gap right here? That's not to worry about. It's going to close as I start to nail down this board. It's going to close that gap up, even that wide a gap. I know because I already blocked it in. This is a very useful tool. I think it's actually made for laminate, but set it on top, pound it in without injuring the board, and I can also use it on the end. Pull bar of this. Do not use your mallet. If you use your mallet, knock this in on the tongue side. Well, this side will be okay. It is angled so you can see, so it hits the bottom and not the top of the board. And you can get away with the tongue here, but if this other part right here, do not hit it with this. It'll split that in a second. So again, I like to use this piece here. Get at the home box store. The other thing on the very end, when you get down to the end of the row there, you want to measure, take your board, flip it upside down. I have a tongue on this one so I can butt it against. If you had just a flat part, you'd have to leave a little gap down there. And bring it across here. Then you're going to measure, mark off where that's going to be. I mean, preferably after this is already nailed in. But you need to leave a little gap at the end, but once I put that tongue, it slides in over here in the mortise. The tenon part of it slides in, it'll put a little gap in there so I can put a pry bar and jam it, pound it this way if I need to. Again, the pry bar being another piece you buy at the store, you stick it in there and just pan that way, pull in that joint tight. There's one point I forgot to make earlier. This is the floor nail. It's got little ridges along the side, making it more difficult to pull out. Sometimes if you don't hit the nailer straight on, dead on, or hard enough, it'll just go halfway in. Don't try to pull it out. They're hard to pull out with those little ridges. It's kind of like pulling a fish hook out. What you can do though, is you can take your pliers and get up close to where the nail's sticking out and just start wiggling it. I know most of you that know carpentry know this. Just wiggle it back and forth, wiggle it back and forth. It doesn't matter up or down. Try not to injure the board when you're going up and down. Until it snaps, it'll snap off. If you just keep wiggling it back and forth, it will snap off. Then I use a countersink, nail countersink, to drive it home the rest of the way below the surface, the ridge there. But yeah, don't panic if that happens. And I guess you might be able to pull them out. Every time I try to drive them in with a hammer further than halfway, they bend. Things are pretty thin. They tend to bend easier on you. Maybe it's a lightweight material they're made out of too, they're very light. So again, just wiggle it back and forth, it'll snap. I know most of you in carpentry that know when a nail's sticking up through a board like that and you can't get it the other end to pull it out, you just latch your pliers on there and start wiggling, 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 and the steel will snap. So this is a place where I have to notch out so it can feed up under the previously undercut casing, but then come out from the baseboard. So I just mark it with tape, and I'm going to use a jigsaw. Get it. Little setup I just do on my miter saw stand where take, set it on there, take a block, because this is a hollow metal piece, and then clamp on top and bottom, then take jigsaw and just cut out that notch corner. Doesn't have to be exact. So I found out that about 6 rows from the end wall, I ran out of room for the nailer. It just takes up too much space in the front to be able to swing down even a few inches to pop it hard. Found that out after one little dent in the wall, and I got at least within 6 rows, but now it's going to really slow down. So I pre-drilled holes for the 10D nails. I don't know if I said 8D earlier, but these are 10D. They're pretty big monsters. That's good. I don't want it too small. 10D 3 inches. You could probably get away with 2.5 inches. 3 is a little bit long probably. So pre-drilled it. Now I'm gonna start hammering and then countersinking them. But boy, that's a lot of rows. When I get the last 2 rows, I'll probably have to face nail straight through the top. Well, I'm down to 3 rows to go. The 3rd row I'm nailing right now. I can still nail at an angle. Slightly increased it over 45, so I don't have to big a backswing. Next 2 though, I'll have to face nail. And this little device here is, I had a bad tongue on the board before, so it's helping pull this in a little bit. It's not too expensive, it's pretty cheap as I recall. So I got down to my last row, and unbelievably, I didn't have to rip boards on the table saw, which is a shame because I could show you how to do it. I hate those shows where somebody's always right on it. That's the opposite end from where I started, and the gap is acceptable. The quarter round here, I tried a piece that covers it. So it's actually about a 1/2 inch wide, I think. maybe a little bit more, maybe 3/4 inch, looks like 3/4. So this gap, I didn't have to rip a board, but if you came, you know, where you're uneven, you might have to rip in and glue the last thin piece to fill this gap and then pop it down in there. Last 2 rows I had to face nail over the front. Before that I was able to edge nail in at an angle, just like the stapler does. These last 6 rows, man, they took forever because, again, the nailer wouldn't fit in there. So I actually hand nailed through up until the last 2 rows, and I face nailed through the top. I'll fill that with some acrylic or wood putty. I did put actually a few screws, they're pretty small, you can already see the head. There's one down there. And the end boards in the corners. I'll fill that with acrylic. I'll color match it. I'll take some of my kids' acrylic paints and max it with the Bruce Hardwood product that they make. If you don't have one of these spreaders here, I think this is about 24 bucks on Amazon. If you don't have one of those, you can use a pry bar here and just put a shim behind it so you don't injure the board behind it. This little piece here came in real handy. Sometimes I get to the end, I wouldn't have enough gap to put my spreader in there until I closed the board against the joint. So I would take this and start it out, and then I was able to get the pry bar once I got it. It helped me also to take some boards out when I needed to spread them out. So again, I got lucky. I got down the last row. I hate that. When you see Norm do this old house, he always measures the diagonals when he's checking for a square. Once he's clamping up a square to make sure that each diagonal is equal, they're always equal. I've never seen the guy say, oh, they're unequal. Okay, how are we going to adjust the clamp now? They don't really teach you that. It's the same thing on this hardwood. I mean, every room I've done in the past, I've always had to rip boards at the end. Sometimes I might have to rip them a little wider on one half of it, a little narrow on the other half, put them together, glue them together, and then pop them down in there. But this one just kind of worked out 2 1/4 inch all the way across the room, which you wouldn't expect to come all the way across and without having to rip a board. Amazing. Next, I'm going to work on thresholds. So I've finished the floor and I'm getting ready to put in some 1/4 round. I'm measuring that. I'm not sure a system to do that in a minute. But it was interesting to look at the threshold where I cut this threshold out between the door. This T-inner piece is going to go in there. And again, I built up a board underneath so I don't have an air space between that and the subfloor. But anyway, it's interesting to look at the gaps. See under the boards on the sideboards, see that gap there, gap there, gap there. They make these boards with the gap bigger at the bottom so you'll close at the top and the bottom won't hold it out. So it's really not even touching much on that bottom edges there. Anyway, for the 1/4 round to measure it, you could take a tape measure from one end to the other end, do inside corners. I just grabbed 2 scrap boards here and just overlap them and do a little line right there, and then I'll take these 2 boards out and put them next to my piece of 1/4 round, and I'll cut it long, of course. Definitely going to cut it long and do 240. I mean, it won't be exactly 45-degree angles. I'm going to angle a little bit more than that so the tip's closed and the back's open, and then caulk it. So, you know, instead of 45, instead of 45, it'd be like 44, maybe 44 and a half. I'm gonna hold a right angle up under there and see how off it is, but again, they're never perfect, so it's always better to close it a little more than 45, like 44 or 40. Some people do 44 and a half. That'll close the front edge, leave maybe a little gap at the top. Sometimes you can caulk it.